Kenan Banana, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Zimbabwe and observe the laws of Zimbabwe. So help me God.
You are watching Kenan Sodindo Banana taking the oath of office on the 18th of April 1980. On this day, Kenan Banana became Zimbabwe's first president and Robert Mugabe became Zimbabwe's first prime minister. The man you are looking at right now is Prince Charles, or should I say was Prince Charles, because he is now King Charles, a king of the UK. He has been king since the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth, in 2022. However, in 1980, he was still a prince, so we'll call him Prince Charles. He is seen in this video handing over legal documents to President Kenan Banana. These are the legal documents which finally disengaged Britain from all colonial responsibility over Zimbabwe. From this point, Rhodesia was no more. A new baby called Zimbabwe was born. But today, we are going to take a look at how Zimbabwe was actually colonized. We want to answer the question of, did Lobengula sell Zimbabwe to the whites? If he did sell it, then for what price? And by the way, was it his to sell in the first place? And if we accept that he sold it, doesn't that give the colonizer a legal right over Zimbabwe in terms of ownership? Well, fellow Sadzaitas, slay queens and bingers, socialites, papalites, wasinamalites, varikudya rice, nevasinama rights. Welcome to the special report. So, did Lobengula sell Zimbabwe to the British? To answer that question, we need to rewind and go back in time. The year is 1888. The day is October the 30th. This is the day Lobengula signs the deal that will change the political trajectory of Zimbabwe forever. But at this stage, there is no country called Zimbabwe. Essentially, there is Matabeleland and Mashonaland. Matabeleland is known as Mtwagazi. It has one leader, Lobengula. Mashonaland, on the other hand, is not a formally organized state or kingdom. It is a loosely defined region under the influence of various Shona chiefdoms, which are largely remnants of the Mutapa and Roshi empires. And by the way, Lobengula doesn't consider himself a king of Matabeleland only. No, he also considers himself a king of Mashonaland. By domination, some Shona chiefdoms sometimes do rebel, like Mambotowe Chipi, but with dire consequences. Most foreign concession seekers who want to mine in Mashonaland go to Lobengula first to seek permission. All the concessions and treaties signed by Lobengula mention that Mashonaland belongs to him. Without a doubt, Lobengula is at this point the ultimate Don Dada of Zambezia. In fact, in one of his letters, Cecil John Rhodes says the following about Lobengula.
I have always been afraid of the difficulty of dealing with the Matabele king. He is the only block to Central Africa. Once we have his territory, the rest is easy.
Those are the words of Cecil John Rhodes. They are a testimony to how formidable the Ndebele kingdom was by African standards. However, Lobengula doesn't know it yet, but he is in the midst of a serious storm, one that will soon engulf and destroy his kingdom. You see, Lobengula is navigating a complex diplomatic landscape, balancing pressures from the Boers, the British and other foreign agents. He aims to protect Ndebele sovereignty while leveraging European rivalries to his advantage, often signing treaties to secure allies or resources without fully grasping their long-term implications to his kingdom. This is happening 4 years after the Berlin Conference. And for the benefit of those who might not know, in 1884, European countries had gathered in the capital city of Germany to decide on how to share Africa amongst themselves without fighting each other. So the Berlin Conference was about setting rules on how Europe was going to colonize Africa. So by 1888, the scramble for Africa is in full swing. Competition is high. Foul play is rampant. European powers, driven by greed and imperial ambition, are racing to claim the African continent for themselves. Chief amongst these European powers is Britain, which at the time is the most powerful country in the whole world and looking to expand its empire even further. At the heart of Britain's expansionist agenda lies this man, Cecil John Rhodes, a mining magnate and a cunning politician. He dreams of a British empire stretching from Cape to Cairo. But this is no easy task, of course, because as I said, competition is high. It's a scramble for territories, you see. And one of the territories that Rhodes is eyeing is the land north of the Limpopo and south of the Zambezi, the land we now call Zimbabwe, but at the time, it's sometimes referred to as Zambezia. Cecil John Rhodes migrated to South Africa from Britain at the age of 17. And just like Solomon Mujuru, Rhodes had a very troubled childhood because of illness. He was sent to South Africa by his family in the hope that a climate would improve his health. And indeed, his health improved. A year after arriving in South Africa, he ventured into diamond trading. And after years of hard work, perseverance, monetary support from the Rothschilds, bribery, and a degree of luck, Cecil John Rhodes soon found himself very, very rich. And with riches comes influence. He now wanted to use that influence to further an imperialist agenda. He ventured into politics at the age of 27 when he got elected into the Parliament of the Cape Colony. What was the Cape Colony? Well, you see, at this point, South Africa was not one unified country as it is today. It was divided into 5 states. You had 2 Boer states, 2 British colonies, and 1 African kingdom, the Zulu Kingdom, which by now was now a British protectorate. The 2 Boer states were the Orange Free State and the Transvaal, which was also known as the South African Republic. The 2 British colonies were the Cape Colony and Natal Colony. The Cape Colony was the bigger of the 2. It is the one which handled Britain's colonial agenda in Southern Africa. That's where Cecil John Rhodes lived and practiced his politics as an MP. He would go on to become Prime Minister of the Cape Colony in 1890. The Boers and the British did not like each other. They were always fighting. This is because the Boers arrived in South Africa before the British. When the British later arrived, they took the Cape and Natal from the Boers by force. And so began a rivalry which would last for over a century as the 2 groups fought over territories. And one of the territories that they were both eyeing is the land we call Zimbabwe today. You see, the South African Republic, aka the Transvaal, led by its president Paul Kruger, sought to expand its influence northwards to counter British colonial ambitions and secure access to potential resources. The Boers had the aim of establishing diplomatic ties with Lobengula and to gain a foothold in Matabeleland. And so, in 1887, the Boers signed a treaty with Lobengula, the Grobler Treaty. This aligned Lobengula's kingdom with the Boer Republic in the Transvaal, making the Boers one step closer to annexing Zambezia. Now, the Grobler Treaty alarmed the British, and in particular Cecil John Rhodes, because it threatened his imperial plan. Now, in response to this, Rhodes started working on a plan to sabotage the Boers through propaganda and rumors with a view to getting Lobengula to disown the Grobler Treaty. He devised a plan to counter the Grobler Treaty with a better worded treaty which would give him access and influence over Lobengula's kingdom. For this, Rhodes sent this guy, John Moffat, a missionary. John Moffat's father was a missionary too. His name was Robert Moffat, a very close friend of Mziliga's. Actually, Mziliga's even nicknamed Robert Moffat Machobana. And for context, Machobana was Mziliga's father, and Mziligazi was Lobengula's father. Yes, Mziligazi and Robert Moffat's friendship spanned decades. So, sending John Moffat, the son of Robert Moffat, a family friend, to do a business treaty with Lobengula was a masterstroke by Cecil John Rhodes. It put him one step ahead of not only the Boers, but also various other concession seekers. And so, predictably, in February 1888, John Moffat convinces Lobengula to put a pen to paper. Lobengula signs the Moffat Treaty, which is disguised as a friendship agreement between Britain and Lobengula, when in reality it is actually about excluding other European nations from having any influence in Matabeleland. The Moffat Treaty especially counters the Grobler Treaty and thereby blocking Boer advances into Matabeleland. Because he who controls Matabeleland also controls Mashonaland. There is a key clause in the Moffat Treaty which requires Lobengula not to enter into any treaties, agreements or concessions with other foreign powers without British consent. This gives Britain a monopoly over future dealings with Lobengula. Rhodes has killed two birds with one stone. Number one, he has established a working relationship with Lobengula, setting up the stage for the negotiations of a bigger deal. And secondly, he can now demonstrate to the British government that he is a serious player in the game of imperialism. And his ultimate goal? To set up a company which will be given a royal license called a royal charter, which will enable that company to colonize Africa on behalf of the British government. So after securing the Moffat Treaty, Rhodes immediately starts working on a mining deal. By August 1888, he has assembled a team which he hopes will convince Lobengula to sign what will be known in history as the Rudd Concession. Rhodes' team is led by Charles Rudd and also includes Francis Thompson and Rochfort Maguire. Charles Rudd is a long-time business partner of Rhodes. He's also an experienced negotiator. Rochfort Maguire is a lawyer. Francis Thompson speaks and understands Isindebele. This is the team Rhodes assembles and dispatches to Matabeleland to negotiate for the Rudd Concession. Remember, there are various concession seekers at Lobengula's crown who are plugging him like flies around a dish of milk, trash-talking each other like a bunch of teenagers in a bid to win the king's favor. There are so many competing interests, from the Boers to the Portuguese to the Germans and various British concession seekers who, just like Cecil John Rhodes, claim to be representing the British government, which isn't true, of course. But the reason why Cecil John Rhodes is desperate to secure the Rudd Concession is because he wants to secure a royal charter. He wants to outmaneuver all competing British parties, secure the Rudd Concession, then use it to convince the British government to give him a royal charter which will give him the power to colonize and govern Zimbabwe on behalf of Britain. So to realize all this, he is prepared to use every trick in the book to get Lobengula to sign. In any event, Lobengula is already at a disadvantage. He is illiterate. He can't read or write. He relies on translators. And guess what? All the translators are white. And as it turns out, they all play him. During the negotiations, Charles Rudd and his team of negotiators present themselves as being on the side of King Lobengula, and that all other concession seekers are either after a piece of land or a complete takeover of the Matabele kingdom. They make it look like all they are after is mining gold, when in fact, their real aim is to colonize the land we call Zimbabwe today. Repeatedly, they warn King Lobengula of the threat posed by the Boers and the Portuguese, yet they themselves are probably the biggest threat to Lobengula's kingdom. But for over 30 days, Lobengula does not budge. On many occasions, he seeks the advice of his Council of Chiefs and his trusted Prime Minister, Chief Loche, who, as it turns out, plays a pivotal role in convincing Lobengula to sign. But another man who sways Lobengula to sign is John Moffat. Using his influence over Lobengula, Moffat reasons that signing the Rudd Concession would be great for the Matabele kingdom because Cecil John Rhodes has the ability and means to protect the Matabele kingdom from the impending attacks. Finally, on the 30th of October 1888, Lobengula signs the Rudd Concession, believing that he has done his due diligence. But what follows will be a shocker of his life. Because by putting pen to paper in signing the Rudd Concession, Lobengula has unintentionally consented to the destruction of his own kingdom. The king has signed a deal whose terms and conditions he does not fully comprehend. He doesn't even have a lawyer who can explain to him the legal implications of what he has just signed. He is foolish enough not to have the verbal agreements included in the written agreements. And what are the verbal agreements? That Rhodes would not bring more than 10 white people to work in Lobengula's kingdom, and that they would always abide by the local laws of Lobengula's kingdom, and that they themselves would always be Lobengula's subjects. But all this was not included in the signed agreement, for obvious reasons, because all the verbal agreements conflict with the written agreements. Now let's take a look at the written agreements. What did Lobengula sign up for? What did he give up? And what did he get? Lobengula gives Rhodes complete and exclusive charge over all metals and minerals situated and contained in his kingdom, principalities and dominions, together with full power to do all things that Rhodes may deem necessary to win and procure the same, and to hold, collect and enjoy the profits and revenues, if any, derivable from the said metals and minerals. In simple English, Lobengula has given Rhodes the power to do anything, absolutely anything, he thinks is necessary in order to exploit mineral resources in Lobengula's kingdom, dominions and principalities. Now, by saying kingdom, dominions and principalities, it simply means Matabeleland, Mashonaland and any other territory under Lobengula's influence. And in case you're not convinced, Lobengula actually opens by saying, I, Lobengula, a king of Matabeleland, Mashonaland, and other adjoining territories. Now let's take a look at what Lobengula would receive as payment for what he had given up. Well, in return, Lobengula would get £100 per month, 1,000 guns, 100,000 cartridges, a steamboat to be stationed in the Zambezi River loaded with guns, with the option to receive £500 in case he didn't want the steamboat. When Rhodes heard about the signing, he couldn't contain himself with joy. He famously said, what Lobengula had given up was so gigantic, like giving a man the whole of Australia. As far as Lobengula was concerned, this was just a mining deal, and a beneficial one at that, given the guns and ammunition and the armored steamboat that Lobengula was meant to receive. The Matabele knew too well that spears and shields could no longer protect them from their enemies. They needed modern war artillery, and the fact that this artillery was coming from Rhodes gave Lobengula a false sense of security. Who gives a man an assegai if he expects to be attacked by him afterwards? This was their reply to Lobengula's fears that the Rudd Concession would be used to take over the Matabele kingdom. So you see, Lobengula's thinking was that If these men were after his kingdom, then surely they wouldn't be giving him weapons to defend himself. But little did he know that there was a grander scale. There was a deeper agenda at play, a colonial agenda. The king had been outplayed, totally and completely. Word in his kingdom was traveling fast, with talk that the king had sold his kingdom. This infuriated Lobengula. His prime minister, Loche, is one of those who had persuaded him to sign the Rudd Concession. Loche was convinced that it was better for Lobengula's kingdom to become a British protectorate, just like Botswana. This would have given Lobengula some degree of autonomy, but with his authority falling under the BSAC. This is what happened to the Tutsi royalty in Rwanda under Germany and Belgian rule. It's also what happened to Emperor Mavura of the Mutapa state under the Portuguese. It's also what happened to the Zulu kingdom years after the death of Shaka Zulu. The Zulu kingdom became a British protectorate before the Union of South Africa in 1910. Desperate to understand the Rudd Concession and its implications, Lobengula sent emissaries to London to reason with Queen Victoria herself and make his position clear that his kingdom was not for sale. This trip did not yield much. He was outmaneuvered by Rhodes, who by this time was working round the clock to secure the royal charter for his BSAC company. As I explained before, a royal charter is a formal grant from a king or a queen, and in this case, from Queen Victoria herself. It would make the BSAC a super company in that the BSAC would have the power and authority to colonize and govern Zimbabwe on behalf of the British government. And so, on October 29, 1889, Queen Victoria granted the Royal Charter, officially forming the British South Africa Company. This empowered the BSAC to govern Matabeleland and Mashonaland, raise its own forces, and exploit resources for 25 years. Rhodes had secured a private empire under the British flag. All this while Lobengula's emissaries returned home empty-handed. And 11 months later, on the 13th of September 1890, the pioneer column of Cecil John Rhodes arrived in the area we call Harare today. The project of colonization was in full swing, but Lobengula would not give up. He was desperate to save his kingdom, and in the desperation of defending his kingdom, he made an even more dangerous mistake by signing the Lippert Concession with Edward Lippert in 1891. The Lippert Concession gave Edward Lippert land rights. Lobengula did this in the hope of countering Cecil John Rhodes' control over his kingdom. But Lobengula underestimated Cecil John Rhodes. He underestimated him big time. He had no idea the things, the distance, the length at which Rhodes was prepared to travel in order to conquer the land north of the Limpopo and south of the Zambezi. And so, when Rhodes heard about the Lippert Concession, he quietly purchased it, turning it into yet another tool to tighten his grip on Matabeleland and Mashonaland. So now, Rhodes had the rights to Zimbabwean minerals and also the title deeds to Zimbabwean land. And with the royal charter in his hand, it was now game over for Lobengula. But he was not going to give up without a fight. The First Anglo-Ndebele War erupted in 1893, which saw the defeat of Lobengula. He would die the following year on disputed circumstances. Some say chicken pox, others say suicide. Whichever version you like, the Ndebele kingdom had fallen from its former glory, and Cecil John Rhodes had taken over the land we call Zimbabwe today. In March 1896, the Matabele, led by the spirit medium Mlimu, revolted against the authority of the BSAC. The Shona soon joined the rebellion and were spiritually led by spirit mediums Nehanda and Kagovi. But both the Shona and the Ndebele were no match for the sophisticated BSAC. They were soon crushed. The BSAC would go on to govern Zimbabwe from 1890 to 1923 because the Royal Charter, which gave the BSAC the authority to govern Zimbabwe, finally expired in the early 1920s. Initially, the charter was granted for a period of 25 years, but it was later extended by a further 10 years. Then, towards the final expiry of the Royal Charter, the BSAC wanted compensation. It wanted the British government to pay it for developing Southern Rhodesia. It claimed that over the years, it had been developing Southern Rhodesia at a loss. But the British government and settlers disputed the claims made by the BSAC, particularly over land ownership and mineral rights, which the company had exploited under the Royal Charter. The settlers argued that the BSAC's land and mineral concessions were unjustly acquired. But here's the thing. If the settlers and the British government truly believed that the Rudd Concession had been unjustly acquired, then why did they ignore Lobengula? This issue dragged on, and a commission was even established to look into it. In the end, the BSAC was paid 3.750 million British pounds. That money is today worth over $300 million when adjusted by inflation. The payment was to cover administrative deficits and for the company to relinquish its governance role in Southern Rhodesia. The BSAC, however, retained significant mineral rights in Southern Rhodesia, which continued to generate revenue for the BSAC post 1923. And so, after 1923, the BSAC was no longer in charge of Southern Rhodesia. A responsible government was put in place, and the first Prime Minister of Southern Rhodesia was this guy, Charles Coghlan. Now that you know the full story of how Zimbabwe was colonized, you tell me, did Lobengula sell Zimbabwe to the whites? Well, whatever your answer is, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.